During my years in rabbinical school, I've spent many hours in the Beit Midrash, learning with my charuta. And in my experience, we would spend hours upon hours beating our heads seemingly against the desk, trying to understand what our sages are able to say in just a few lines. It was such a difficult and sometimes frustrating task. And yet there would always be those times, those aha moments, when you finally understand what Rashi or the Tosafot or Rambam actually say. When you finally have an idea of what our great sages are trying to teach us. Such an amazing moment. One that I believe is truly sublime. Then you get to class. Excited to be confirmed that you're right, only to find out that you're not so right after all. That feeling of elation? Gone. All of that hard work, seemingly worthless because at the end of the day, you still don't know what our great sages are trying to teach us. I believe that this story has a tension that each of us can experience, each of us has experienced. It's a tension between believing that I am right, that I truly know something, only to discover that I'm wrong. It's a tension between our pursuit of clarity, clarity in our understanding, clarity in our thinking, clarity even in our feelings towards other people, towards the people we care about, only to discover that those feelings are not so clear after all. In fact, they are ambiguous. Clarity often eludes us. That driving on the road of life is like climbing the mountain to Camp Ramah in the thick fog. You think you know where you're going, but sometimes it's really hard to tell for sure. One of the Hebrew words for ambiguous is me'orpal, which comes from the word orpal, meaning fog or blur. Then when we are in the midst of the fog, we don't know how to get out. We don't know where to turn. How am I able to get out of this? I don't really know. I've lost all my bearings. That feeling can be quite scary. Yom evraha yom hahu. That shall be a day of wrath. Yom tsara u'tzuka. That shall be a day of trouble and distress. Yom sho'ah sho'ah. A day of calamity and destruction. Yom choshech va'afela, a day of darkness and deep gloom. Yom anan va'arafel, a day of densest clouds. Yom anan va'arafel, a day of densest clouds. Arafel, meaning a dense cloud, also comes from the word me'orpal, meaning ambiguous. And so perhaps what the prophet Zephaniah is saying in this verse is that we must do every attempt to steer clear from the fog. We do not want to be in that fog and clouds are thinking we don't know where we're going and it's very, very dangerous. Stay out of the clouds. Stay out of those moments in which you might not know what the right path is, because what ends up happening is something that we just are really scared about. And yet, if we find ourselves in those clouds, in that fog, let us remember the words from the prophet Isaiah. V'zarach b'choshech orcha. And your light shall shine through the darkness. Light has the power to break through darkness. And light is often associated with clear thinking and understanding. Take, for instance, the word behirut, meaning clarity or lucidity. It also has a connotation of brightness, of that flash of light that we experience when we finally feel like we know something in the Beit Midrash. I had a similar moment when I decided to come to rabbinical school. I was not sure whether or not to apply. I was in the fog. But then, an instantaneous moment of clarity came, albeit while I was in the shower. But no matter where it was, That moment was so powerful. I would not be here today if it was not for that moment that lit my way out of the clouds. But no matter how powerful that moment is, I don't live it on a day-to-day basis. Every day presents itself with new decisions to make. Try to figure out what's the right path to take. This is something I think that we all share. That we don't live in these moments of clarity, but rather each day we have to figure out, what is it that I need to do right now? Right, left, front, back, I don't really know what to do. That's the ambiguity of life, of the constant journeying, of the constant searching for the right way to live. That's the ambiguity that I believe is characterized by the central feature of the Talmud, of machloket, of disagreement. The rabbis in the Talmud are trying desperately to try to understand what the right way to live is. They're pursuing clarity at all costs. Some of the times, they do come to an understanding of what the right way is, but often they don't. Often, they end in machloket. And as if he is channeling this exact frustration I'm talking about here today, Ben Azai says to his colleague Akiva at the end of Masechet Bava Batra, we're already grieving over all the disagreements that we have, and yet you, Akiva, are coming to tell us that even within those areas in which we are clear, that there's ambiguity, that there's disagreement. All of those moments of clarity are so precious. We want to hold on to them so tightly. But at the end of the day, even Akiva proves that all those things that we think we know for sure, even that has ambiguity. How do we live with this reality? How is it helpful to live in a world in which we seemingly aim for clarity but live in ambiguity? To put it more simply, why does life sometimes feel like the most difficult page of Gemara ever? That's where I believe Parashat Va'era, this week's Torah portion, has something very important to teach us. That this tension of aiming for clarity but living in ambiguity, the reason for this tension to exist is, as I will explain, because out of this tension comes the most foundational human emotion: love. At the very beginning of this week's Torah portion, God explains the divine reasoning for taking the Israelites out of Egypt. God says, "V'gam lani shamati en akat b'nei Yisrael asher Mitzrayim avadim otam, va'ezkor et briti." And now I have heard the moaning of the Israelites who have been placed into bondage by the Egyptians, and I remember my covenant. Va'ezkor et briti. And I remember my covenant. Professor Stephen Geller said in a class of his I took on the book of Leviticus when I was in List College, yes, I have been a JTS for a long, long time. Says that the word ahava, or love, is a covenantal term. It is used when two parties want to cement their relationship together, when they commit themselves to being in that relationship, when they say, I love you so much that I'm going to be with you always. And the power of that feeling can only be expressed in the term brit, in the term covenant. So perhaps when God is saying in this week's Torah portion, Va'ezkor et briti, God is saying, I commit myself fully to the Israelites. I take responsibility to love them till the ends of the earth, which is why we say, you shall love the Lord your God. God is saying that to us right here. But if God loves Israel so much, why doesn't God just free the Israelites? Why doesn't God simply make it so clear to Pharaoh he needs to let God's people go? Why does God send Moses to do God's job? After all, the people can hardly understand him. He's a man of impeded speech, of aral sifatayim. They can't understand the words out of his mouth. And perhaps that's the point. God chose to hide God's message in the incoherence of Moses' slurred speech, to embed the divine message in the fogginess of ambiguity, because love can only exist within a measure of ambiguity. If God was always clear, there would be no covenant. There would be no space for relationship in which the uniqueness of God and the uniqueness of people would be able to exist in the same space. And this relationship, which needs each other, perhaps is explained by the partnership as said in chapter 7, verse 1, when God says to Moses, Re'eh netaticha Elohim leFaro. See, I have made you as God to Pharaoh. Moses is like God because just like God, Moses' speech is slurred. And then God says about Aaron, Ve'aharon achicha yihiyeh nevi'echa. And Aaron, your brother, shall be your prophet. Aaron is like a prophet to Moses, because just like all the prophets to God, and just like us, his role is to understand God's message in the incoherence of God's slurred speech. That's our role. To understand God in the incoherence of God's slurred speech, in the unclear lips of what God is trying to teach us. The very fact that we have that role is God's sign of love. Because it's the only way that a perfect God and imperfect human beings can live in a relationship together. We cannot love if we believe we are always right. We can only love if we are open to the understandings and the thoughts of others. We cannot love if we feel we are fully capable on our own. We cannot love if we feel we're only capable on our own. We can only love if we realize that we need each other. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook once said, Ve'ahava tzricha lihiyot meleya balev lakol. That love needs to be in your heart fully for everything. That's a radical statement. It's radical because there are things which we believe that we are crystal clear are wrong or even evil. But for Rav Kook, even those things come from God. Because God speaks like Moses with slurred speech, with unclear lips. And this is a message that is so important for me as I leave rabbinical school. Because if I internalize this belief that God cannot speak clearly to everyone, it means that everyone has something so special, so godly, that I can hold on to, that I can learn, that I can be a part of. And then, by knowing that, be able to partner with them. Even and especially if they have a different view from mine or from my communities. As a dear classmate of mine said during her senior sermon, diversity is divine. That each of us has an incredible spark, which is created by God. And then God did the most amazing thing out of love ever. God created a world which is ambiguous, in order to be able to give us the space to have the humility, the patience, and the love to hear the Torah that everyone has to say. And when we hear that, when we partner together, we can become greater than ourselves. We can come to greater clarity. The world can become truly sublime. This isn't easy. It's like banging your heads against the table. So let us always seek to be in chavruta, to work together in love and partnership. Tzorayim Tovim.
von Ari Safdam, Ruth Shapiro, with some words of welcome.
Ari, as I stand here full of love and pride in you, and thank you for honoring me by asking me to speak to you on this very special occasion, which gives rise to so many personal memories for me. I first davened in this synagogue as a student in the seminary's College of Jewish Studies and its Teachers Institute, and later listened to your grandfather, Eliyahu Moshe Shapiro. Your Saba delivered his senior sermon here, as did your father, who I heard, Moshe Sachs, and your uncle, David Ackerman, who I also heard. Your mother, Meira, your aunt, your sister, and your wife, Rachel, earned degrees here as well, and I was present to rejoice in each of them. You are a third generation of rabbinic heritage. My grandfather, who I was never personally privileged to know, was a Hasidic rabbi in Hungary before the wars, both the world wars. This week's parasha departs from the straightforward narrative of Moshe's role in Yetziat Mitzrayim, in carrying out God's plan to fulfill the promise, the Brit promise to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and inserts a genealogy which focuses on the place of Moshe and Aaron in our forefathers' history. As the commentary to Shemot notes, a genealogy inherently symbolizes vigor, which we've seen today, and continuity. Its presence here in text also injects a reassuring note into the otherwise despondent mood recorded immediately prior to it, and which many of us experience in the world as we face it. You have inherited a rich tradition, but your choice to become a rabbi is yours alone. You have studied and learned well. You bring a joy and sensitivity to the tradition and to the needs of others, and a firm faith in God and the possibility of tikkun olam. It is now your time to pass this tradition on and to declare, Ze'ei Vanvehu, Elohai Avi V'Arom Amenu. Know that both those who preceded you and all of us here with you today look forward to hearing your unique, sweet song of joy as you become a Rav to Yisrael.
I will now recite the Dishta Rabbanan.
Yizkadal v'yitzkadash shemech rabah. Ramad v'raf v'yitzechem l'kmah putei b'chayakon v'v'chon v'chaydav b'ei Yisrael. B'agalam zman karev yimru. Amen. Yehi Yishmer rabah v'olam v'yamayla. Yibarach v'yishalat v'yifa'ar v'yifam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitoleh v'yitalal shemech v'yishad v'yishad v'yilam v'yitol v'yirchata v'shirata v'yishbachata v'nechamata v'amiram v'omah v'yimru. Amen. Al Yisrael v'alav v'nacham v'yidehon v'apot v'yitam v'yidehon v'opaman v'oskin v'oraita z'gatra hadim v'zibocholata v'ata Yehelohan v'lchon shlom v'rabach v'ina v'chista v'rachamim v'chista v'chim v'zanar v'yircha ופרקנמי קדם והודי בשמיה ואמרו אמן. יש לומר רבה משמיה וחיים טובים עלינו ועל ישראל ולעוננו. עשה שלום ממרומיו וברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Hearty Scott to Ari Sachs for very uplifting words of Torah. My name is Michael Goldstein. I'm the Gabbai here at the Weekly